What are you watching, Father?
Master.
So that's the guy from the end of the last film, which means that this probably is the first... No, not probably. This is the first 28 Days Later film where the introduction isn't set before the rage virus. Because all the other ones, the introduction is set before it happens.
It is also the first film in this series, I believe, where this movie is set straight after the ending of the previous one.
Fucking get him. Go on.
Not that this has anything to do with the quality, but I would imagine that anyone that hasn't seen 28 Years Later, the first one that isn't Bone Temple, that this would be an incredibly confusing introduction. Because obviously we've jumped straight into the middle of this scene of them all surrounding him. They all look like Jimmy Savile.
If you're a British viewer seeing this and you've not seen the previous one, and you see a kid surrounded by Jimmy Savile lookalikes,
yeah,
you might be a bit uncomfortable.
Interesting decision. Obviously, it's always better to have seen like the first film before you see the sequel. 28 Weeks Later works as its own film, independent from 28 Days Later.
This is the only one in the series of 4 where I think you might be a bit confused if you haven't seen the previous one.
Very
the third
true.
One.
It's interesting that the title, as presented just now, is just the Bone Temple. It doesn't have that 28 Years Later beginning tag.
Do you not think it's because it's got a bit old now?
As I said in the preamble, there was a great title just sitting there, which was 29 Years Later. But like no one knows what the Bone Temple is. The only way you know what
do you mean? Everyone knows. Everyone who's seen the previous one knows what the Bone Temple is.
Yeah, but I guess my point is like you'd think that they would want people that haven't just seen the last film to want to watch this because you've already got established a high ceiling or low ceiling.
They would want people to watch the previous one before.
I think people are sick of things like that, like sick of. I think people have caught on to
have the Marvel.
Yeah, the Marvelitis, where it's like they try and make you do homework.
I named you for your size and strength and hair.
I still really like the idea that like this is happening in the UK, but the rest of the world just kind of don't give a shit.
Yeah, they're just like, that's their problem to deal with.
It's like that one weird cousin that we all have, and when there's like a family reunion or like a family party or something, you know, and you bring your other half there, you're just like, oh no, that's just my cousin, like Bob, like don't mind him, and he's just there in the corner like, whoa. Do you think people in this universe just kind of like in the UK just kind of forgot about 9/11? This is so much worse.
I saw a tweet that was like, do you think that like in the 28 Days Later universe that 9/11 is as big of a deal? Because it's like surely like the complete destruction of the UK ended up being a little bit more relevant. Yeah, I mean it's I think I said this in the last episode, but it's interesting to imagine how culture has responded to all of Britain collapsing, because presumably there are a lot of people outside of the UK who had British relatives who died, exactly as the kids. You know how the kids in the second film, 28 Weeks Later, they were outside of the UK when all that happened, and they only rejoined later on. It's just interesting to think what kind of books have people written about this? What kind of movies have they made?
Who do you think would be the most likely director to make a movie about this?
I'd say Danny Boyle, but he'd probably have been dead. How interesting. That was a really cool little detail. So
but thank you for pausing in the worst possible way.
There was so what we just saw was like what the alpha.
You're the alpha.
Yeah, like what the alpha was saying, and the alpha sees a human being in the same way that we see them, which is to say like ugly and disgusting. That's really interesting. I quite really like that.
But isn't it setting up for the whole thing of like in that Will Smith movie?
Yeah.
I Am Legend, right?
Yeah.
That like they're just the new kind of humans. I think they talked about that in the previous one as well, no?
I think we discussed this briefly.
Oh, maybe we discussed it as well. Okay. I don't know why I said it like that.
No, well, yeah, the book I Am Legend, not so much the film, but the book. The point is that the version of Will Smith's character in the original book, he discovers that to the zombies that he is the monster. That's obviously the point, and it's like a new form of life. I guess that is literally what is happening in this as well. Nia DaCosta has done a really good job of using only what we can see, like, as a film, because if you're just listening to this section, you won't have seen that there was no real dialogue in that sequence, and yet we saw pretty perfectly well like what kind of past Dr. Kelson had. She managed to do that without any dialogue.
I wonder if you understand anything I say.
I do think that I haven't read I Am Legend, by the way, so I don't know to what extent that this is the case. But I do find the whole sentiment of maybe we're the real monsters to be a little bit like, you know, makes you think we live in a society, kind of a bit vacuous.
Insists on itself. You know?
I'm okay with it in this film. As I say, I think she's doing a really good job with it so far. But I do think it's a little bit, like, just in abstract, I find it a little bit pretentious. But as to how this will materialize in the actual story itself, we shall see. I think this film, like the last one, feels like two films that are competing for time, because
you're right.
Like, I forgot in this.
I was about to say, I forgot about the Jimmies.
Yeah. I forgot about that. I forgot about Spike. Already I forgot about that because we're now with Dr. Kelson.
And I don't care about the Jimmies.
Yeah, I care about Dr. Kelson. I would prefer this to be what the film is about. I think that's really cool. I like the idea that we're following a man who is entirely on his own. He's the only human being on this island. I mean, it's very I Am Legend in that sense, because I'm pretty sure that the book is about basically the last human being left alive after this zombie apocalypse. That's kind of what this film is so far.
If they wanted to kind of combine the two, they could have had Spike stay with him and just kind of like train to be a doctor or something.
Yeah.
Brought in and nourished in both stomach and heart.
When this film jumps back to the Jimmies, I kind of forget what's happening with Dr. Kelson, and when it jumps back to Dr. Kelson, I kind of forget what's happening with the Jimmies. That makes sense? I think it just plays to the fact that, again, there's so many... I mean, there are a lot of interesting concepts in this film, and there are a lot of interesting concepts in the previous film as well, but this one especially seems to highlight the issue that I had with the first 28 years later film, which is that there are too many things going on and there are too many characters that are entirely disconnected from one another. And it's especially compounded in this one because, at least in the previous one, 28 years later, these ideas were being introduced for the first time, and there was an expectation that it was going to be developed, obviously, in this film. This film is so reliant on the kind of exposition of the last one that it feels like we've jumped into the action between these two completely separate storylines. I just don't really feel like they merge very well together. I personally, as much as I was excited, as I explained in last week's episode, to see what was going to happen with the Jimmies and that whole conceit that they're all basically cosplaying as the worst criminal, or one of the worst criminals in British history, as much as I was interested in that, I am finding myself drawn more to Dr. Kelson's story. I find that to be actually more interesting. But every time that we jump away back to the Jimmies, it feels like I'm being ripped away from that.
Yeah, I agree with that. It kind of feels like we're watching, like, the narratives. There are two separate narratives. And even though we have the understanding that, like, it's happening at the same time, it's almost like if you picture a piece of paper and you draw two lines, what's the word? Perpendicular? They'll never meet.
Yeah.
You know, because it's just all happening at the same time, but it's not really, there's no connection between them.
I want you to have lasting peace, Samson.
He is basically like the dog in I Am Legend, like the film I Am Legend.
Who is like the
Samson is like the dog.
Samson.
And Ralph Fiennes' character is a bit like Will Smith's character in that. Because I'm sure that even if Nia DaCosta or the people that wrote the screenplay for this film, even if they're not deliberately trying to parallel the book, that it clearly is accidentally, probably because the I Am Legend, the book, is so influential. But, like, I think this is an accidental parallel to the film that just to kind of amuse me.
But how many, zombie movies are there, and how many zombie stories can possibly be made? I guess.
The first film, 28 Days Later, retrospectively, was kind of understood almost like an allegory for COVID. I mean, obviously, they didn't know about COVID at the time. They didn't know about the 2020 lockdown and pandemic. But it gained extra cultural cachet because of all the scenes of sort of empty London and empty Westminster, which obviously was replicated in 2020 when COVID happened. Ralph Fiennes' character being entirely isolated from any other human being and sort of stuffed and forced into this claustrophobic environment where he can only understand human connection through his memories, that feels very much like lockdown. I imagine it would have felt like lockdown for a lot of people, especially people that were on their own who had to lock down and quarantine on their own.
Oh God, I can't imagine going through lockdown, like living alone.
I was lucky that I was initially living with friends at the beginning of 2020, and then when the pandemic was getting worse, I moved back in with my parents. So I had social connections to rely on during that time, whereas I think there was obviously there were people that were a lot less lucky than that. This just reminds me very much of isolation.
Take me with you.
I'm surprised that this film has not been more about Spike. I mean, we're about halfway through the film, and Spike isn't really a character in this. I mean, like, obviously, the main action that Spike has taken in this film is abandoning them while they're murdering these people. So, I mean, you would assume, having watched the last film, that they were setting up Spike to be one of the main characters in this one, but really the main character outside of Dr. Kelson and what's going on in his storyline is the person who's playing the lead, Jimmy, in their gang.
When I see Ralph Fiennes, what's his name here? Dr.
Kelson.
Dr. Kelson, when I see him, I care about his character. Then I see this, and I completely forget about Dr. Kelson, but I don't care about this group.
I would agree with you. I mean, I know that obviously that is the point, that the characters are villains, and so with the exception maybe of Spike, who we know from the last film, we don't care about this gang in the sense that we want them to be safe. Obviously, if anything, we want them all to die. But in terms of like caring about what's going on, I really care about what's going on with Dr. Kelson and with Samson. I think that is a really, really good idea. I think it's really cool. I think actually you said this in one of the previous episodes, I can't remember which.
If it's smart, then I said it,
about how you were wondering whether they would establish what it's like from the zombies' perspective, and we are getting a bit of that. We're getting that insight in this film. I don't mind seeing acts of cruelty depicted in a film, and obviously a lot of really horrible things are happening right now in the film, which I've probably edited around, so it's probably whatever you're experiencing watching this is probably significantly less worse than the experience of actually watching it.
You're welcome.
But it's not so much about, at least for me, it's not so much about that graphic violence. I'm fine with the graphic violence. There's a lot of graphic violence in the previous ones. It's just that I find this a lot less interesting than what's going on with Dr. Kelson.
Because
this feels more like
care about them.
This feels more inspired by something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is to say there's a lot of wanton cruelty on display. I really like that film, but that film is about the acts of wanton cruelty, whereas this feels more like this part is a distraction from the really interesting part, which is what's happening with Ralph Fiennes.
Did you notice that Samson's eyes are not as red?
Yes, and also whoever the actor is who's playing Samson, I think he's done a very good job of making his physicality more human as it's gone along.
Yeah.
Or maybe that's partly the makeup team, because you can definitely tell that Samson's...
Maybe all of them, yeah.
Maybe, well, probably it would be all of them, I suppose, to a certain extent. But they've done a very good job of showing him become more human.
Behold, you are the fingers of my right hand.
I think the film has become a lot clearer now that they've actually met and storylines are entwining, that we have Dr. Kelson and Sir Jimmy meeting. I also really like the dialogue that Dr. Kelson has. Like, you can tell he's a really affable bloke. I think that this has come a bit too late in the story. I think that it should have been entwined earlier on. And I also whenever we cut away from Dr. Kelson, I keep you know that Simpsons joke about when Homer is playing Poochie in the Itchy Scratchy show? He says to the producers, when Poochie's not on screen, all the other characters should be like, where's Poochie? And I feel like that. Like, I feel like whenever Dr. Kelson's not in the film, all the other characters should be like, where's Dr. Kelson? Because like he is the soul of this film.
I love that you brought The Simpsons into this.
The funny thing about this scene, again, is that it's basically incomprehensible unless you've seen the last one, which I'm not saying that as a criticism, because there are plenty of sequels that only work on the basis that you've seen the original film. But if you were watching this having not seen the last film 28 years later, you would have no idea that Dr. Kelson knows Spike and that Spike knows Dr. Kelson. So, I mean, it's interesting to me just how unforgiving, I suppose, this film is in terms of catching the audience up to speed as to what's going on, because you need to have seen the previous one to understand what's going on. It's not the case that it helps, but like most sequels, you think of Although, as I say, there are examples where this is kind of the case. But for the most part, I think most sequels try to at least catch the audience up to speed if they haven't seen the original film.
But, but then the criticism is that they're stating the obvious,
Yeah.
That it's kind of giving ever since Mum died
Yeah.
vibe, So it's just interesting, that's for sure. Like a different way of doing it where you trust your audience to, A, be smart enough to actually just be able to engage with this even if you don't know the full backstory.
Yeah.
And B, to maybe have seen the previous one, And I think most of the viewers would have seen the previous 3.
You know what's really funny? This is entirely tangential to anything you've just said, but you mentioned that ever since Mum died thing. Completely coincidentally today, I Googled myself and I tried to figure out what Google's AI search knows about me, because I was like, tell me about this person. And one of the things it lists is that I'm the inventor of the ever since Mum died theory of movie exposition. I don't even think it's on Reddit. I don't think I posted on Reddit. I think it's just on this podcast that I've just talked about that.
That's pretty cool.
It's so weird. Like, why that I'm the inventor of the ever since Mum died theory.
You know what?
as if it's like a big theory in film discourse.
I bet there's going to be one film student quoting
ever
Sam
since
Brown
Mum died
in his podcast.
That would be a essay. I wouldn't recommend doing that.
I'm sorry.
It's okay, Spike.
Spike was a weirdly inconsequential character in this film. Like, that really genuinely took me by surprise, because if you think about it, if you subtract Spike entirely from the film, the only thing that doesn't quite make sense would be Kelson's turn at the end. Like, that is literally the only thing he does in the film, is that he is kind of the foil to Kelson. Which, again, I feel like what I wanted to see was more of him, Dr. Kelson, that is, and less of any of the other characters. I did really like Sir Jimmy. I like that character and I like that villain.
Sir Jimmy.
That's what his name is, or Jimmy Crystal. I like that character a lot. It's just that I didn't really think that what he was doing was that interesting, or at least that the plot and the story surrounding him wasn't particularly interesting. But what was happening with Dr. Kelson was so fascinating.
I preferred that plot line as well. And there's only about 12 minutes left. And I am very curious to see what's happening with Samson.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's kind of been left open still, but maybe we'll see a bit.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of wondering if they're trying to set up for another movie. Is there another one coming?
Well, that was the intention. The film didn't do great at the box office, so it's a bit of an open question at the moment as to whether there will be another one. But their intention was to make 3 films.
Yeah.
Which I think is part of the reason that the last one, 28 years later, felt like it was setting up more than it was actually its own kind of film.
Dad, do we help them?
Of course we do.